I'm Vinny Politan. Great to have you with us tonight here on Closing Arguments. And we begin this hour with the story of a 23-year-old young woman from Bridgeport, Connecticut, who died. She was healthy, but then was found dead.
It's killing me inside. I miss my baby.
No one is going to discard my daughter like she's rubbish.
I feel like because she's a white guy and she's a black girl, it's just almost like they just thrown it under the rug.
Thank you to everyone watching, and a special thank you to our subscribers. Your support means everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. She was young, beautiful, full of dreams. A daughter, a sister, a friend, the kind of person whose presence could light up a room, whose laughter could make even a stranger feel at home. At just 23 years old, Lauren Smith Fields had her whole life ahead of her. But in the early hours of December 12, 2021, that life was cut short. She went on a date, and she never woke up. What should have been just another night, a casual meet-up, a few drinks, a conversation between two people getting to know each other, became something else entirely, something that left Lauren lifeless in her apartment, while the man she had spent the evening with walked away without a scratch, without suspicion, without consequence. The police ruled it an accident, a tragic overdose, just another young person taken too soon. But to those who knew Lauren, to those who loved her, that explanation never made sense, because Lauren was cautious. Lauren was not someone who would recklessly place herself in harm's way, and yet there she was, gone. Her family, desperate for answers, found only silence. No immediate call from the authorities. No urgent knock at their door. Instead, a note, a cold, impersonal piece of paper left on her apartment door, telling them what no parent, no sibling, no loved one should ever have to find out this way, that she was dead. And so, the questions began. Questions that should have been asked by the investigators. Questions that should have been answered before the case was brushed aside. Who was this man she met that night? What really happened behind closed doors? Why did the police fail to treat the scene as suspicious? Why was crucial evidence ignored, discarded, overlooked? And why, despite the overwhelming outcry, does justice still feel so out of reach? Because this isn't just about one night. This isn't just about one case. This is about the way stories like Lauren's are handled, the way some lives are treated as less urgent, less worthy of answers, less deserving of justice. This is about a family that refuses to be silent, a truth that refuses to be buried, and a woman whose life demands to be remembered, not for how it ended, but for the fight that continues in her name. Bridgeport, Connecticut, just another quiet night in a city that holds countless untold stories. But on December 12, 2020, inside a modest apartment, a tragedy unfolded that no one was prepared for. Her name was Lauren Smith Fields, 23 years old, a daughter, a sister, a friend. A young woman with dreams too big to be contained. She was studying at Norwalk Community College, balancing her coursework with ambitions of becoming a social media influencer. She had the kind of presence that made people stop and pay attention, not just because of her beauty, but because of the warmth she carried, the light she gave to those around her. She was the kind of person who made the ordinary feel exciting, a free spirit, an adventurer in her own way. But she wasn't reckless. She was careful. She was careful, and yet, in the early hours of that December morning, something happened that none of her loved ones could have ever imagined. She had met someone, a man named Matthew LaFountain. They connected through Bumble, a dating app that millions use every day, a place where strangers become acquaintances, where conversations turn into plans, where trust is given. Sounds too easily. To Lauren, it was just a simple night, a date, a chance to meet someone new. But by morning, the details are unsettling, the questions endless. What happened inside that apartment that night? How does a healthy, vibrant young woman go from sharing drinks and conversation to being found unresponsive in her own home? The official report called it an overdose, an accident, a tragic but straightforward end. But nothing about this felt straightforward. Not to her family, not to those who knew her, not to the people who saw the cracks in the investigation before it even truly began. Because when Laurent took her last breath, the system that should have fought for her. A quiet apartment in Bridgeport, a night of drinking, conversation and laughter. At least, that's how it was supposed to be. But something shifted in the early hours of December 12, 2021. Something that turned an ordinary night into a tragedy that no one could explain. Matthew Lafountain, the man Lauren had met on Bumble, told authorities they had spent the night together. Tequila poured into glasses, a movie playing in the background. The kind of evening that so many others had before them. But when morning came, at 6:30 am, Lafountain picked up his phone and dialed 911. His voice was steady, his words deliberate. He told the dispatcher that something was wrong, that Lauren was lying there, unresponsive. No signs of distress, no struggle, just stillness. Paramedics arrived quickly, moving with the urgency that life or death moments demand. But by the time they reached her, it was too late. Lauren Smith Fields was gone. Just hours earlier, she had been laughing, talking, living, and now the life in her had vanished. Without a sound, without a sign, without a single moment to fight back. The official explanation came swiftly. An overdose. The toxicology report revealed a mix of fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol in her system. A lethal combination. But here's where the story twists, where the questions begin to surface, like cracks in a fragile surface. Lauren's family knew her. They knew her habits, her choices. And they couldn't accept it. They couldn't believe that a healthy 23-year-old with no history of drug abuse would somehow ingest a deadly cocktail of substances in her own home. On a night when she was with a man she had only just met. And then, there was the way the police handled it. Because as the news of Lauren's death spread through her family, it wasn't a phone call from authorities that told them what had happened. No detectives at their door. No explanation, no empathy. Instead, it was a note, a simple piece of paper, left on the door of her apartment telling them to call a number. That was how they found out their daughter, their sister, their friend was gone. And while her family was left gasping for answers, Matthew Lafountain was never handcuffed, never considered a suspect, never even treated like a person of interest. He was allowed to leave that apartment without being detained, without being questioned the way families of victims so often expect suspects to be. And as the hours passed, as the case grew colder, one thing became painfully clear. Lauren Smith Fields was gone, and the people responsible for finding out why weren't asking the right questions. The call had been made. The paramedics had arrived. The scene had been processed. Or so it seemed. But what happened next was something Lauren's family never could have anticipated. Instead of urgency, instead of investigators meticulously combing through every detail, they were met with silence. The medical examiner's report was swift and final. An accidental overdose. Fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, alcohol. A deadly combination. A conclusion drawn before anyone could ask the most critical question. Lauren didn't use drugs. Her family knew that. Her friends knew that. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't denial. It was a fact. So how did a lethal opioid, one responsible for thousands of deaths across the country, end up in her system? And why did the police seem so quick to accept this? Explanation? In cases like these, standard protocol is clear. Secure the scene, gather evidence, question the last person to see the victim alive. But that didn't happen here. Police never treated Matthew Lafountain as a suspect. He wasn't detained. He wasn't interrogated. His apartment wasn't searched. Forensic team was sent in to collect potential evidence that might have explained what happened in those final hours of Lauren's life. And then there was the way Lauren's family found out. Not from a detective, not from an officer delivering the news with the weight of human compassion, No, they found out when they showed up to her apartment, worried after not hearing from her, only to see a note taped to the door. A single piece of paper with a number scrawled on it, telling them to call. That's how they learned their daughter, their sister, their friend was gone. It was a moment of unbearable shock, but it was also the moment they realized something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just about their grief. This was about the questions the police weren't asking, the investigation that wasn't happening. The family demanded answers. They wanted to know why no one had considered the possibility of foul play, why no one had tested La Fountain for drugs, why critical hours had been lost, hours that could have preserved evidence, that could have changed the course of this case. But instead of cooperation, they were met with resistance. Days passed, then weeks. The case remained untouched, an afterthought, and as time slipped away, so did any chance of uncovering what really happened that night. And so, Laurent's family did the only thing they could. They refused to stay silent. They took to the streets, their voices echoing through Bridgeport. Protest signs held high, justice for Lauren. They demanded accountability. Brush Aside was making national headlines. The world was watching. And finally, the authorities had no choice but to respond. But was it too late? Had crucial evidence already been lost forever? Had justice already slipped through the cracks? Grief is supposed to come with answers. When a loved one is lost, there is supposed to be closure, a full understanding of what happened, why it happened, and who was responsible. But for Lauren Smith, Field's family, there was none of that. There was only pain, confusion, and a deep unsettling feeling that justice was slipping away before their eyes. From the very beginning, they knew something wasn't right. They knew Lauren. They knew her habits, her fears, the things she would and would not do. And they knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she would never have put those drugs in her own body. So if she didn't, law enforcement seemed to care enough to ask the obvious question, who? Lauren's mother, father, and brothers didn't just grieve. They fought. They stood before cameras, before reporters, before the people who could make a difference, and they demanded the truth. Why had the police dismissed their concerns? Why had they treated their daughter's death as an inconvenience rather than a case worth solving? Why was the last man to see her alive allowed to simply walk away without scrutiny, without consequence? Their voices didn't just echo in Bridgeport, they spread across the nation. Civil rights attorneys joined their fight. Protesters filled the streets. Social media erupted with calls for justice. Justice for Lauren wasn't just a hashtag. It was a movement that forced people to ask hard questions about how cases like these were handled. A movement that placed an uncomfortable spotlight on the Bridgeport Police Department. And under that spotlight, cracks began to form. The department could no longer ignore the family's claims. The pressure was mounting, the scrutiny was intensifying. And then, something unprecedented happened. 2 detectives, the very ones responsible for handling Lauren's case, were placed on administrative leave. It was a rare admission of failure, a small but significant step toward accountability. But it wasn't enough. Because justice wasn't about suspensions. Justice wasn't about apologies. Justice was about uncovering the truth. And Lauren's family refused to accept anything less. Their attorneys wasted no time. Legal action was taken. A formal complaint was filed against the police department, arguing that what had happened wasn't just negligence. It was a violation of Lauren's civil rights. The right to a fair and thorough investigation. The right to be treated with the same urgency and care as any other victim. And for the first time since that tragic night, it seemed like something was finally shifting. The city, the country, the world was watching. The Bridgeport Police Department was forced to do what they had failed to do from the very beginning. They opened a criminal investigation. But was it too late? Had the damage already been done? And most importantly, would the truth about what really happened to Lauren Smith Fields ever be uncovered? At first, Lauren Smith Fields was just another name in a police report. Just another unfortunate incident, another case quietly swept aside, buried beneath the weight of bureaucratic indifference. But her family refused to let that happen. The news spread fast, faster than the Bridgeport Police Department could ignore, faster than authorities could control. Social media became the battlefield, and the voices of thousands turned into a roar. Hashtags flooded timelines. Justice for Lorne, say her name, but black women deserve justice. The public wasn't just asking for answers, they were demanding them. It wasn't just about Lauren anymore. It was about something much bigger, a pattern, a disturbing, undeniable reality, one that black families knew all too well. Time and time again, when a black woman goes missing or is found dead under suspicious circumstances, the response is muted, delayed, dismissed. Cases remain unsolved. Questions remain unanswered. Lauren's story reignited a painful, urgent conversation. Was her case treated with the same urgency it would have received if she had been white? Would law enforcement have acted differently? Would they have investigated sooner, searched deeper, asked harder questions? Or would there have been an immediate arrest, a media frenzy, a full-force pursuit of justice? Like so many other high-profile cases where the victim didn't look like Lauren, the disparity was impossible to ignore. National headlines began to take notice. Celebrities, activists, and civil rights leaders spoke out. Even major news outlets, UMAS that had initially overlooked Lauren's case, were now covering it. The pressure was mounting. Authorities could no longer avoid the questions that were now echoing across the country. The Bridgeport Police Department made a public promise, a thorough review of the case, a vague diplomatic response to growing outrage. But for Lauren's family, for the thousands fighting in her name, a promise wasn't enough. A review wasn't enough. What they wanted was action, justice. And even now, after the protests, after the headlines, after the promises, they are still waiting. More than a year has passed since the tragic and unexplained death of Lauren. Yet the questions remain. Unanswered, echoing in the hearts of those who loved her. The story she could have lived, the life she could have had, is overshadowed by a web of uncertainty, and with it, the painful truth that no one has been arrested in connection with her untimely death. Matthew LaFountain, the last person seen with Lauren, still walks free. His name has never been officially linked to the crime, and yet the weight of that night, of what happened in those final moments, hangs heavily in the air. Why has justice failed her? Why, despite the mounting evidence and the painful cries of a grieving family, has there been no official reckoning? Lauren's family, devastated and seeking answers, refuses to remain silent. They continue their fight, not just for justice for Lauren, but for a broader cause, to change the system that has allowed this case to remain in limbo for so long. They are speaking out for every victim whose case slips through the cracks, for every unanswered question that leaves families in despair. The fight isn't over, but it is clear. The road ahead is long and filled with uncertainty. Her story, her life, is not just a tragic headline to be forgotten. It is a call for change, for the system to do better, for justice to be served, not just for Lauren, but for all those who might one day find themselves in a similar situation. Where will this case go next? Will Matthew LaFountain ever be held accountable? And most haunting of all, will we ever learn the truth of what happened on that fateful night? Until then, the search for answers continues, amidst the quiet echo of unanswered questions and a justice system that has yet to provide the closure Lauren's family so desperately needs. The world watched as Lauren Smith Field's life was cut short. The questions still linger. The answers remain elusive. Was this tragic event truly an accident, or is there something deeper at play, hidden beneath layers of silence and inaction? What happened that night when Lauren took her last breath? Who was there to protect her? And why did the truth slip through the cracks? As her family continues their fight for justice, The story isn't over, not by a long shot. There are still pieces of this puzzle that don't fit, and it is up to us to demand the answers. Your voice matters. Was Lauren's death truly an accident? Or does something far darker remain buried in the shadows? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your theories, your concerns. This is a conversation that we need to keep having. If you want to see more cases like this, if you want to keep following the fight for justice, don't forget to subscribe. This is a story that needs to be heard, and we will continue to follow it. Because justice for Lauren Smith